Hello and welcome to As the CMMC Churns. I'm 𝐚𝐩𝐩𝐫𝐶𝐞, the CEO of Peak InfoSec and authorized C3PO. I'm also a CMMC certified assessor, certified professional, and been doing information security for too long. So this episode of As the CMMC Churns is Approve the Forgotten Verb. Now, as y'all know, if you've watched other videos, anything that happens after this point is totally unscripted and is subject to, well, craziness. So we're going to jump all the way back to previous churns, and if you haven't seen this, you don't recognize this, go back and look at our As the CMMC churns on verbs. You really do need to go through this. Now, in there, the quick summary of this, we talk about the two classes of verbs, and within which there are four main verbs that pop out. Identify, establish, define, and specify. That is where you were setting your system configuration setting. You're defining the guardrails of the way you want your system configured. That's equivalent in 800.171 Rev 3s to an organization defined parameter. Now, the other verbs are everything you're organizationally implementing and you're required to be doing. Again, there's the dynamic of tell me what you should be doing, and then are you doing what you told me you should be doing? Unfortunately, what's going on within the ecosystem, people are forgetting the verb approve. This is popping up in a lot of JSVAs and non-voluntary audits and even gap assessments that we're doing as a C3PO. Now, the reality is approve is that bridge from when you're defining something to your implementation. If that bridge ain't there, your implementation is not going to be compliant. We'll talk about that. Now, the related requirements are going to be 343, track, review, approve or disapprove, and log changes to your systems. Now, 345 is more related to your isolation techniques that you're using then within those changes to enforce the physical or logical access restrictions. Again, we see the verb approved in here. We are looking for things to be approved. Now, when it comes to that relationship to other requirements, as you notice, both of those were configuration management related. So everything really does kind of flow and go through the other configuration management requirements as you're managing the rest of the 101 CMMC requirements and NIST 800.171 requirements. Let me correct myself there. So when you get that change request, doesn't matter whether it's in a ticket, an email, governance meeting, agenda top, whatever. So your first thing, you're really trying to track it. What is it? I've got visibility into them all. We're reviewing them. And then there's a decision made about approve or disapprove. And then you're logging that change. Again, a lot of ways to do this. There's no one perfect way. Just make sure you're meeting all the intent. Well, part of 343, typically you're also and should be doing 344, analyzing the security impact of that change prior to implementation. And then likewise, you are then, at that point in time, if this change is related to a logical access restriction, whether physical or logical, you are then going to make sure that that meets that requirement and you're good with that. Part of that review then, you're going to make that decision. Here's that bad verb, approve or disapprove. Well, if you say disapprove, no, well, you just notify the submitter and you end the process. If you actually say yes, well, you're still going to generally notify the submitter, hey, we're going forward with this, you're going to affect the change. Well, affecting the change now means you're back to 341, and now you're updating and establishing that baseline configuration around that change. Related to this then does come 342, establish and enforce security configuration settings. So this is where you start to see all the other requirements fit in underneath configuration management. Once you're done doing all this and documented everything, then you're going to end your procedure. Now, what happens when you don't do approve? Well, it's kind of ugly. You fail a lot of these. Now, not necessarily all of them directly. You may be tracking, reviewing, and approving some, and these may be working in other use cases. But let's pick on one. So in the use case of unsuccessful login attempts, if that's not approved, you failed that requirement too. Yep, that's the way this really does work. And this is where a lot of people are failing to understand that when you're going through your gap assessment, you're thinking through this, you're taking a myopic view and you're just kind of looking through that requirement and you're not seeing the mesh between all these other requirements, the way they really fit together. So let's take a look at that requirement and dig in a little deeper. So what do we expect as an assessor coming in to assess you? Well, let's pick on that first one. We are going to examine approved system design documentation. So if you followed my other CMMC churns around configuration and documentation management, we do not recommend putting these configuration settings in your policies and procedures, and even your system security plan. That tends to make your architecture very fragile, very prone to a lot of corrections and revisions, and it's a pain in the butt to maintain, just to be honest. We recommend having this in your system design documentation, and that could be anywhere, and we'll show you examples of that later on. So we are looking for approved documentation somewhere that says this. Now, likewise, in the examination for the implemented, again, there's your to-do verb. We're looking at the security configuration settings for all the components and scope and their associated documentation. Now, that is probably where we're going to do a lot more of the interview side. And that will be, okay, can you show me this? How does this work? Etc. Likewise, when it comes to testing, we may test the mechanisms. Now, I'll be honest with this one. Generally, locking people out of their system is typically something that's a little bit on that side of being destructive. And so we typically generally don't test this one, just so you know. So we're going to look more at your configs. Now, what happens next is when that unapproved system design documentation is not met, means that 318 alpha is not met. So the assessment objective fails, which in turn means the requirement fails. This is the way, again, crap rolls uphill. So this is the challenge then, no matter if you're technically implemented everything, but you haven't done this, you're still going to be not met. Well, why, Matt? Why does it say that? Well, let's look at the draft CMMC rule. Section 170.24, scoring methodology, paragraph B, subparagraph 1, says that all evidence must be in final form and not draft. Right there. Sorry. Draft equals not met is the bottom line answer. So how do you approve your system design documentation? Well, there's really kind of two main methods. There is the in-bulk method. So this is normally done when you have a third-party vendor sets up the environment for you. You bring in one of the big MSPs. They set up your GCC high environment, configure it for you. Normally, there's two steps in what should be going on in here. You have the settings are pre-approved as a part of your negotiations for the way you want set up as part of that onboarding. And then you need to validate after they've set it up. And, you know, putting on my old program manager hat, we would call that a final production design review. And there's other acquisition milestones you can throw in here if you really want to be dorky about it. Here's the reality. I'm going to foot stomp something for you here. Don't trust your MSSP to do it right. They are humans. They will screw up. They have the right intent. And I'm sorry to say, there's yet to be an MSP that I've followed that has implemented this perfectly all the time. Now, what happens after that and or normally is incrementally. Now, this is done apart as organization defined parameters. You know, again, every define, identify, specify verb is changed or set. Establishes a little bit in that range, but it's not specific is probably the best way to phrase it. Now, that being said, organizations fail when they've come in, done a bulk assessment, and then they start making changes, and the changes now deviate from that bulk approval. Well, where was that change approved? oh, yeah, you've got to be doing incrementally all the time anyway. We recommend, and the way we work this with our clients is we try and avoid doing in bulk because that tends to create bad habits. So we tend to, by default, work incrementally. Now, how do you document this? Well, we'll show you some examples from Peak InfoSec. So from the organization defined parameters, we use a OneNote file. We track all of our ODPs, as you can see here in this image, of what, for the unsuccessful login, just kind of follow them with 318, how we track it, what we do, what the settings are, what the expectations are. Now, likewise, we do also use PowerPoint slides for governance meetings. Now, right now, and this is our template that we use for clients that we're onboarding on a consultative nature and training them on and getting them going in this setup. You can actually use this template and this template architecture, and it works perfectly fine with every DIBCAC audit. Likewise, we then have a standard SharePoint list that you can use straight out of the box from Microsoft for tracking IT tickets. This one here is for the boss's Mac. Per our policy, once Apple will no longer support Macs on the most current OS version, it is time for us to replace that Mac. So in this case, just completed this before recording this video, and so that ticket has been closed out to replace her desktop PC. So let's sum up. Don't forget the verb approve. Please do not forget. This is going to be a great way to augur in your assessment if you can't prove to us that everything is certified. Now, as a part of that, make sure all of your define, identify, specify, and establish related assessment objectives are approved. Seriously. Hint, hint. Wink, wink. Nudge, nudge. Please do so. And then likewise, remember unapproved settings equal draft and are not met. That is the consequence of where this goes. Likewise, once you go through this process and you maybe do a bulk approval, but incremental is really the way you have to do this on a change on a day-to-day basis of managing your environment. Now, there's lots of ways to document your approvals. We don't care. Just to be blunt and honest. You could do a bulk approval with a letter. You could do anything. I just need something that tells me this is the way it is, and this is the way it should be, and it's approved. Okay? That is what assessors want. So when it comes down to it, just do it. Approve all of your define, identify, specify, and establish related assessment objectives. And again, I'm Matt Titcomb with Peak InfoSec. Thank you for joining us for this episode of As the CMMC Churns, and have a great day.